Hey everyone, how are y'all doing? It's Katie here, the Mountain Mystic, and I'm so happy to be here with you today in my backyard forest. I love to do these videos outside in direct connection to the earth, with the earth, as part of our New Earth Embodiment series, a series here that has everything to do with, yes, helping you cultivate a spiritual practice, to walk a spiritual path that is aligned for you, and that does so in connection to the greater whole we are all part of. It is a healing path. It is a path of calling in the light and bringing in that transformation that is needed right now, transformation within self and for the whole collective, for the whole planet Earth that we are all part of. And today what I want to do is have a conversation that brings us directly into a specific topic, a topic that has everything to do with meditation, the practice, the skill that is meditation, the state that is meditation, right? Meditation is sort of a funky word because you can use meditation in all these different ways. You can use it as a practice. You can use it as a state. You can use it as a skill, right? And here we'll use it in all of the above. But what I want to do is have what I know to be a very unique conversation, that comes through given my own unique path, right? If you know me, if you've been around, you know that a big way that I walk my own spiritual path is very literally walking, sometimes running. I'm a trail runner. I am someone who needs to be outside, moving my body in connection to the earth. And my path as a meditator is what I might speak to as sort of a core, the crux of this story of how I learned to be in practice in ways that aligned with me. And the flip side being the very hard, painful mistakes that I learned when I tried to stick to a practice that was not aligned for me. And what I'm speaking to here directly has to do with the mistakes I made in meditating. Now, I started meditating many years ago. I was probably 18, 19 years old. I'd just gone off to college and got my hands on, a first set of spiritual texts. And where these texts came from was the Buddhist tradition, and the texts that contained practices that I, started practicing routinely had everything to do with what we can speak to as vipassana meditation or insight meditation, a more generally mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation being the sort of trendy word that everyone knows about. But the practice of, coming into stillness, probably closing down your eyes, turning inward, and becoming witness to your thoughts, becoming witness to your breath, becoming witness to the sounds around you. And through this practice, right, of stepping into witness, what happens over time is that we learn that we are not our thoughts, that we are not these patterns that have been programmed within us. We are something deeper, or we might say we are something higher. Point being, we are not our thoughts. There is something beyond that. And through meditation, particularly this very focused practice, what we can do is tune in to the truth of all that we are. Right? It's a deeply spiritual practice, but it's also a deeply practical practice. Right? If I go back to those days of those first moments of realizing, wow, I'm not my thoughts. I've lived this whole life thinking I am something, but really I'm something different. And knowing myself as something different, it now brings me to what we could speak to as a higher level, right? I now have a higher awareness. And from this state, I can start to cultivate greater skill around my thoughts, around my actions, around my way of being in this world. And with this, I have to honor, right? This is, I'm a very embodied person, so I feel this, right? And I feel this like from my depths, this honoring of what has come to the West as, again, this Vipassana meditation technique, this mindfulness meditation technique. It's a powerful one. And another part of this, right, the power in it, being able to, shall we say, detach from the chaos that is stirring in the world and to ground ourselves into something deeper, something more skillful. And from this space, being able to take intentional action, right? Being able to be active creators in the world. So this is a practice that served me for years, right? It is a practice that served me because I was able to, again, detach myself from the chaos of my thoughts, from the chaos of reality, to center myself, to find that peace within, right? That inner peace. And to move from there. There's a but coming though, right? I've set us up for a but coming. However, what I found, right, my personal experience is that, as I, just started out on the spiritual path, again, just 18, 19 years old, me alone off at college, finding books and YouTube videos and apps that I started following. I found this practice and it was helping me. It was helping me, but it wasn't grounded into anything deeper. It wasn't grounded into anything, shall we call, holistic. So then what happened? Then what happened is that I went on in life and things started to get really bad. In my own personal life, things were not okay. This is also a time when the COVID pandemic was starting, so the world around me was not okay. Things were bad. Things were bad and I knew it. And I knew I wasn't okay. So what I did was I clung to this practice that had served me before. Okay, the world is chaotic. Okay, my thoughts feel chaotic. Things are scary. Things aren't good. But what I know how to do is sit in silence, sit in stillness, close my eyes, witness all the chaos, push it away, and find that stillness within. So this is what I did. This is what I did month after month after month as the pandemic went on, as the world around me got scarier and scarier and scarier, personally in my own life, as well as out in the world. And what this story actually is a story of trauma occurring. It is a story that led into what really became my downfall, my descent. It is a story of me ignoring what I should have been paying attention to so that I could, force out the world, force away what I didn't want to deal with so that I could cling to that peace, that stillness within. Now, I'm sure, and I know this for a fact, right, that if you really ground yourself into this tradition that I had pulled this practice from, this is not what they teach. So that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying here is that as a young person who extracted a practice out of a greater tradition, a more holistic tradition, and started calling upon it, using it for what I thought I needed, this is not the sort of holistic spirituality that we are here for. This is actually a story that turned quite dark, that led to my PTSD, that led to, that was an active part in it, because I couldn't be present with what I actually needed to be present to and to take action in the way that I needed to. Instead, I was relying on this practice to give me what I thought I needed. So what this conversation gets to be is a space to bring awareness to your own spiritual practices, your own spiritual path, and a space to bring awareness to, are you walking a path that is grounded, that is holistic? Or are you walking a path where you are sort of plucking particular practices out of a greater, more holistic framework to serve a need that you think you actually need? Just sort of feeling into that, tuning into that. Maybe you go and meditate on that. So what this path did, right? This story continuing to unfold here. What did continue to unfold is that I found that I was unable to meditate in any way, shape, or form that I had learned before. Sitting in stillness, closing down my eyes, it's like the chaos, the fire of the world was just getting louder and louder and louder, and eventually I couldn't do it all. It was just making things worse. So I sort of did away with my meditation practice and did the thing that I do, which is sort of dive into all the books, all the teachings that I could to try to find something else that worked for me, right? This practice wasn't serving me, but I knew there were other practices out there. So it's at this point that I really shifted fully into yoga, right? Yoga being an embodiment space, a space that is really directly supposed to help with things like anxiety, like panic disorders. And I learned a lot. There. I learned a depth of philosophy that spoke to me in a way that, shall we say, the Buddhist tradition never did. And it really spoke to me. But the problem is the practices were not helping. I would try to do yoga, right? Very simple, basic yoga. I tried to go into tabletop or down dog, and I found that the experience was now actively triggering. It was making things worse, not better. But I kept going, right? Because this is what we do. This is what we do, and when we're in dark times, we keep moving forward. And as I keep moving forward, the thing in my life that is getting louder and louder and louder is trail running, particularly this game I play, this sport I'm engaged in, that's ultra running. This sport where I go run crazy distances, set these wild goals and take steps, one step at a time until I complete it. Started with 50Ks, then it moved up to a 50 miler, then 100K, and today I run 100 milers. And no one out there, right? No spiritual teacher is out there going to tell you to go run 100 miler as the greatest spiritual practice that you could embark upon. But my truth, my reality is that these ultramarathons became the space that I could, shall we say, set a container, a goal with a path to get there. Not a firm path, but a path that I knew had to exist. Sorry guys, we got a helicopter. We've got fires burning around us. again. It's summer in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains. Fires are burning around me again. So we got helicopters flying over to bring water back and forth from the fires. Just a little reminder of why I do what I do. Again, looping us back into the fact that what we're doing here is finding those practices that, yes, help self, but do not disconnect self from reality, right? Because reality right now is, in truth, quite dark, quite painful. A lot of I'll just use the word bad things are happening, and it's because humanity has sort of shifted so far away from any sort of grounded, holistic, spiritual path. Because of that, we've created a very dark world, and, we're not addressing the problems that we need to be addressed. And, just a little reminder from our helicopter up above that that's what we're doing here. That is what we're doing here. And we get to do it through formal teachings, and we get to do it through these wild stories that we live. And so again, getting back to ultra running and trail running as this wild path I found myself on in a really dark time where I was doing everything that I could. I was signed up for multiple yoga teacher trainings, a yoga therapy training, like trying everything I could from the traditional paths to find those practices that could help me. And nothing was helping me except for when I got outside, got my feet on the earth, and moved my body. Whether I was hiking, running, it doesn't matter. The point being that trail running is the embodiment practice that was able to get me into my body, present in reality, present in self, in connection to this earth. And it's this space being the space from which I could finally start to heal. This is the space from which the anxiety, the panic, the fire within that had been consuming me, this is when that fire started to go out with ground, physical ground, dirt, rock, root, soil beneath my feet, moving my body, breathing into my body, moving in motion out in nature. This is where all those spiritual, all that spiritual philosophy, right? All those ideas of healing and transformation that I'd strive to, call in, and all these traditional practices, meditation, yoga, out on the trails, moving my body, feet on the earth. This is where it finally all unfolded, that I could embody this experience that I'd been calling in. And again, pointing to the fact that, I'm not here to tell you to go sign up for ultramarathons as a spiritual practice. If that speaks to you, that's amazing. And I want to hear from you, because then you're one of me, and that's amazing. For most of us out there, that's not the path. But getting outside, getting your feet on the earth, moving your body, very likely is a practice that can help you. And the best part of this story, right? The best part of this story is that as I healed and as I, shall I say, gained more skill and knowledge and wisdom on this spiritual path, I got to a point where then, once the fires within me sort of died out and I'd gotten a hang on, my panic disorder and that chronic crippling anxiety, once that had started to heal and move on, then I could once again start to pull in those more traditional practices. Yoga, asana, meditation, and that Vipassana meditation that we spoke to a whole bunch at the beginning of this video. Once I was again in that grounded, more holistic space, that's when these more traditional practices, the practices that I do teach because I do know they are powerful, that's when I started to call them back in again. So that the space from which I teach today is one that is grounded, one that is holistic, one that has us opening to the practices that do serve, one that has us discerning when practices are not serving. And again, this is really the problem that I was having, going back to the beginning of this story, the problem with my mindfulness meditation, my Vipassana meditation, the problem that became my downfall because I didn't have awareness around it. I couldn't address it. The problem was not that the practice itself is flawed. The problem was that I wasn't holding this practice. I wasn't practicing within, again, that more holistic model, a model that, the way I teach it, awareness being the core piece, having that expanded awareness as, step one, not focusing, not, trying to get the chaos to go away, not reaching towards something that I want while getting the rest to fall away. Those are, shall we call them, more advanced steps. The core of the practice and step one of what I teach has everything to do with awareness. Now, what is awareness? Awareness is expanded consciousness. Awareness being expanded consciousness. So we can, if you think about your consciousness, your attention, your awareness, right? You can hold space in your head, in your fields, right? And do this with me, right? Do this with me. You can hold awareness for your breath, your inhale as it comes in and your exhale as it flows out. You can have awareness for your heart space, bringing your consciousness into your heart space. And you can expand your awareness out, and it's really great to do with something like a tree out in nature. Bringing awareness, your consciousness, to the trees around you, the rocks around you, the ground beneath you. And if you know me, if you've been with me for a while, you know that this is the main practice that I teach, right? The main practice that I teach is a practice of moving your consciousness around. Because what was my downfall, right, as I spoke to it in this story, is I was so focused and I was trying so hard to concentrate on that which I thought I should be concentrating on. But I didn't have that expanded awareness to be in tune with all that was actually present. And in those moments, we're speaking to those pandemic times and the times leading up to it in my own life, I did not have the awareness, and I didn't have the ability to hold awareness with, bring my consciousness to and hold it there so that it could actually be present with the really bad things that were happening in my life, right? I was using meditation, what I was calling a spiritual technology, to push that away so that I could focus on what I thought mattered. And that's not a skillful spiritual path to walk, right? That's not the spiritual path. That's not a skillful path for anyone to walk. Again, it was a path that became my downfall. a path that I learned a lot from. It made me who I am today, and made me the person who can teach all these things because I've made mistakes. But I don't want you to make the same mistakes. And if you're someone who might be making a similar mistake, again, sort of clinging to a particular spiritual technology, a practice, because you heard someone on the internet talking about how great it is and how helpful it was. My advice is try it out. Try it out, but do so holding the awareness of all that is actually unfolding. All that is actually unfolding, and not just in your head, not just in your thoughts, but also in your body. I'm gonna weave a few more pieces in here before we close today. This in your body piece really being the core of what I do teach today, right? I teach an embodied spirituality, and I teach an embodied spirituality because of this hard lesson I learned that had everything to do with kind of a Buddhist meditation technique that really just had me stuck in my head. And again, it's not because there's an inherent flaw in that spiritual tradition, but it's because I had extracted the practice from that tradition and was using it in my life in isolation from a more holistic and grounded framework. But this practice had me stuck in my head, and it had me disconnected from my body. And I wanted to be disconnected from my body because my body didn't feel good. So when I didn't feel good, I used this practice to disconnect even further. But that didn't solve the problem. It made things worse. Things got far worse. So now what I teach is, again, bringing awareness to the whole of who you are. Bringing awareness to the whole of who you are, because you are a whole embodied being. It's not just you in your head on an ascension path. You are a whole embodied being. So when we meditate, we have to hold awareness for everything that is going on today. And with that, I think what I'm going to do is bring this video to a close. There's a story that I wanted to start out with today in this video, but we didn't do that. So what I want to do is start another video where I speak to that story specifically. I'm going to move out of the sun. I'm going to find a shadier spot. And I'm going to come back. So if you're watching this just after this video has been released, that part 2 probably won't be released for another few days. As always, make sure you like this video, leave a comment if you're here watching so I know that you're watching, and speak to what's alive for you. I like to have these videos where I kind of jump around and weave lots of things in, and I'm curious what part of it all is resonating for you. Of course, make sure you're subscribed, turn on those notification buttons so that you know when part 2 is coming out. If you're watching this a little bit later, I will link part 2 lower in the notes. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today.